Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 201, Water Demon 3. You don't seem to know what a threat is. Should I explain it to you? The calm voice coming from behind caused Elder Biam's expression to stiffen. In an instant he didn't even perceive it. For someone to be able to take his back with such internal skill, they were definitely not a low-level martial artist. Based on his perception they were clearly at the peak realm. But for them to be able to conceal their chi to this extent and deceive his senses meant they were a master who could fully control their energy. Unbelievable. Elder Biam inwardly denied this. That's because in order to deceive him to this degree, one would have to surpass the wall. But wasn't this brat before him only 17 or 18 years old at most? To have reached the transformation realm at such a young age. Right. That's impossible. It's more likely he cultivated some special internal cultivation method. Even he who had cultivated martial arts for nearly 60 years had not reached that realm. How could a young lad like this possibly have surpassed the wall? Convinced of this, Elder Biam stomped on the ground. Pop. He had to get away from the bastard first. Leaping forward, Elder Biam twirled his body, his grey Taoist robe fluttering. Two extremes connected hands. The moment he spun, the sleeves of his robe turned into sharp blades, unleashing a murderous energy. It instantly sliced through the heavy downpour within a radius of almost 50 feet. Swish. But it didn't end there. Elder Biam stomped his foot towards the ground. One step scattering strength. The instant he stomped on the accumulated rainwater, the splashing droplets absorbed his true energy and transformed into a dispersing hidden weapon. The range was so wide that... Damn it! Block it! Xing. Siap Chun and Mong Muyak simultaneously drew their sabers to fend off the incoming water droplets. Clang clang clang. The power of the droplets infused with true energy was enough to make their hands holding the sabers go numb. The two of them defended against it while inwardly clicking their tongues. Not only had he reached the peak stage of the transcendent realm, but it would be no exaggeration to say the old man's internal energy had already surpassed that level. Clang. Tremble. With internal energy of this caliber he could almost be considered on par with the 5 kings, who were high-ranking executives. Seeing them being pushed back while blocking the true energy-infused water droplets, Elder Biam rolled his eyes and searched for Mok Jiangun. He had unleashed quite a powerful technique to distance himself from the fellow. Both were quite formidable, but they consumed a considerable amount of internal energy. However, Elder Biam felt that at least this much was necessary to definitively separate the fellow from his back. Where is he? Where the hell is he? The downpour was so heavy that it was difficult to secure his vision right away. But then, what an interesting technique. Elder Biam's expression stiffened at the voice coming from behind him. Naturally, he had thought he had gained some distance. But what was going on? I failed to create distance? Elder Biam was utterly baffled. He had unleashed an omnidirectional offensive technique, yet not only did he fail to gain distance but his back was still being seized. How was this possible? Elder Biam gritted his teeth. How could he repeatedly have his back taken by this young brat? Impudent bastard. Elder Biam changed his approach. Rather than trying to gain distance he took the 5 sequential steps, a poison stepping method, to change direction while simultaneously unleashing the 2 extremes connected hands to attack Mok Jiangun. This time, since he hadn't gained distance, if Mok Jiangun wanted to block or dodge the 2 extremes connected hands, the boy wouldn't be able to continue his antics of seizing his back. Swish. At that moment, a dark shadow appeared before his eyes. Got you. Elder Biam unleashed his claw technique towards the dark shadow. 2 extremes roaring claws overturning grasp. Bam 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 bam. It was like a roaring tiger lunging at its prey, baring its sharp fangs. Elder Biam intended to seize the victory the moment he caught the figure. However, swish. What? At that instant his 2 hands executing the claw technique grazed past the shadow. Then a voice came from behind. Too slow. You punk. Elder Biam swung his claw backwards. Swish. But his hand touched nothing. Instead only Mok Jiangun's mocking voice reached his ears. At this rate will you even be able to see my face? Is this bastard toying with this old man? Bam 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 bam. Enraged by the mockery, Elder Biam was about to unleash his claw technique indiscriminately. He felt that he had to get this brat in front of him to vent his frustration. But right at that moment, thud. A piercing pain shot through his right leg and Elder Biam's figure slipped on the rainwater, about to collapse on the ground. Startled, Elder Biam hurriedly reached out his hand to avoid falling. However, thud. Ugh. A kick struck his exposed left rib as his figure crumbled, and he was sent tumbling to the ground. Bang. Arg. Fallen on the ground, Elder Biam clutched his ribs and groaned. It seemed his bones had been broken by that recent strike. It was difficult to even breathe. Mok Jaeungun's voice reached Elder Biam's ears. You're quite the exaggerator. Or is it that you've aged to the point where enduring this level of pain is challenging? Cough, cough. Elder Biam raised his head with a stiff expression. He saw Mok Jaeungun standing there with his hands behind his back, looking down at him. To be so humiliatingly knocked to the ground and have to look up at this punk's face. Elder Biam was genuinely at a loss for words. Did this brat really surpass the wall? The gap was so evident that he had no choice but to acknowledge it. This bastard was truly a master of the transformation realm. For someone not even in his prime to reach such an astonishing realm. He was a true monster. Which sect was he from? With martial prowess like this, his reputation should have been well known in the martial arts world. Even though he was from that place, Elder Biam was still aware of individuals with great renown in the martial arts community to a certain extent. Elder Biam struggled to regulate his breathing and asked, Haha, what is your name? Why do you want to know? I don't have any particular intentions. I was simply in awe of your martial prowess and curious about your esteemed name. Then you can remain curious. It meant he had no intention of revealing it. Elder Biam let out a sigh that was almost a lament. The situation had become quite ironic. To think that the person he provoked at the young lady's insistence turned out to be a master of the transformation realm. How absurd could things get? He had truly messed with the wrong person. It was this old man's mistake. In fact, it was difficult to call this a mistake. Encountering a supreme master who could completely deceive one's senses was extremely rare. And so was meeting someone who had reached the transformation realm at such a young age. It could be said to be close to the realm of misfortune. Ha ha ha. Elder Biam straightened his body and said, All right. If you won't reveal your esteemed name, I'll just call you Little Junior. Clasp. Elder Biam brought his hands together in a polite gesture and bowed his head. This Elder Biam sincerely apologizes to Little Juniors. Apologize. That's right. Regarding this matter, even if I had two mouths, I would have nothing to say. But this old man truly had no intention of causing harm. However, regardless of the circumstances, it's clear that I made you feel threatened. For that, I apologize and will provide the maximum compensation within my means. So please, just this once, show some leniency. Elder Biam bowed his head respectfully once again. Unlike that place, the martial arts world operated on the logic of power, so he discarded his pride and apologized accordingly. But if he only did this verbally, it might not be effective at all, so... Swish. Elder Biam took out a square jade token from his bosom. He then presented it to Mok Jaeungun and said, This is a first-grade jade token issued by the Seo Pyong Money Vault. Seo Pyong Money Vault? That's right. This jade token allows you to withdraw 100 gold taels at once. 100 gold taels? A glint flashed in Mok Jaeungun's eyes. 100 gold taels were equivalent to 10,000 silver taels. It was a tremendous sum of money, enough for a sect of considerable scale to operate for about a year. With this much, anyone would have to let the matter go. Oh, is that so? I'll gratefully accept it. Mok Jaeungun received the jade token. Seeing this, Elder Biam thought to himself as expected. Even martial artists were human. Naturally, no one could resist such a huge sum of money. Although it was unfortunate to lose half of the travel expenses he had received, it was better than unnecessarily escalating the situation. Thank you. Just as Elder Biam was about to break his hand gesture and stand up, Mok Jaeungun put the square jade token into his bosom and said, Compensation is compensation, but shall we continue the earlier conversation? What? Elder Biam frowned. What was he talking about now? After receiving a Seo Pyong Money Vault jade token that could immediately withdraw 100 gold taels, what was he saying? Look here. This matter should be concluded like this. It's not concluded. There are things that can be settled with money and things that can't. No. After receiving such a huge sum, you're saying this now? I am. If you were stronger than me, there would be no need to give money or apologize so meekly. You would have achieved what you wanted. Elder Biam's mouth closed at Mok Jae-un's words. It was hard to deny because it was true. In the first place, he had tried to pressure them with force to take them to the young lady. In fact, he had said those words, so it was difficult to make excuses. Elder Biam tried to appease Mok Jae-un as tactfully as possible. Little Junior, I fully understand your feelings. If it seems like I tried to smooth things over with money, what do you understand? It doesn't seem like you understand at all. Didn't I say that's not the case? This old man simply. Wouldn't it be faster to directly experience it rather than just talk? Experience. Yes. It seems you can't differentiate between a threat and cooperation. Is this guy really? At Mok Jae-un's words, Elder Biam's eyes sharpened for a moment. Come to think of it, his companions were nowhere to be seen. Right at that moment. Crash. How dare you? Elder Biam's pupils trembled frantically at the thunderous sound and familiar shout coming from the inn. You bastard. Whoosh. With a distorted face, Elder Biam hurriedly leaped towards the inn. As he entered the inn through the back door, Elder Biam's expression stiffened. There, along with the collapsed bodyguards, Mong Muyak was standing behind the veiled woman, pressing his blade against her slender neck. Although Mong Muyak and Siep Chun were a level below Elder Biam, none of the other bodyguards were capable of handling the two of them. You bastards. Let go of that person right now. Elder Biam pressed them with a voice filled with anger. In his heart, he wanted to tear them apart for pressing a blade against that person's neck. In response, Mong Muyak spoke in a cold voice. It's best not to move. And how could he handle this situation? He hadn't expected these bastards to actually commit such a disrespectful act. Just then. How does it feel? Do you now understand the difference between cooperation and a threat? Clench. Elder Biam bit his lower lip at Mok Jae-un's voice coming from behind him. He never thought he would be retaliated against in this manner. He had messed with the wrong opponent. Chapter 202 Water Demon 4. How does it feel? Do you now understand the difference between cooperation and a threat? Elder Biam bit his lower lip at Mok Jae-un's voice coming from behind him. He never thought he would be retaliated against in this manner. It seemed he had really messed with the wrong opponent. These bastards. The young fellows were truly vicious. He never expected they would take the young lady hostage as revenge. No, there wasn't even an opportunity to anticipate it in the first place. Elder Biam glared at Siep Chun and Mong Muyak with sharpened eyes. Could these young men possibly not be from righteous martial arts sects? Elder Biam's mind became complicated. Although he had been overbearing due to the young lady's insistence, if they were righteous martial artists who valued negotiation, they wouldn't have gone this far. In that case, evil sect. From what Elder Biam knew, unlike righteous sect members who valued face and honor, evil sect members prioritized profit and benefit, readily engaging in such acts without hesitation. If that was the case, it would become even more troublesome. He had already apologized and even offered compensation, yet they still acted this way, meaning negotiation was futile. Clench. Elder Biam gritted his teeth. The situation was so disadvantageous that he was getting angry. However, it was crucial to remain calm in times like these. The young lady who had been taken hostage must also be feeling fear in this unfamiliar situation. If he didn't handle it carefully, it could lead to the worst outcome. Right then. Impudent bastards. The veiled woman, whom he thought would be frightened, opened her mouth, her cheeks trembling. Seeing her attitude, Elder Biam clicked his tongue inwardly. She was indeed that person's daughter. Even in a life-threatening situation, she still uttered such words. This won't do. Elder Biam shook his head while looking at the veiled woman. It meant to refrain from speaking as the situation was dangerous. No matter how preciously she was raised or how carefree she was fundamentally intelligent. At the very least, he believed she wouldn't do anything foolish in a situation like this. Listen. Elder Biam calmly addressed Mok Jae-un. Yes. Regarding this matter, it's indeed this old man's fault. However, even in the martial arts world where grudges are settled decisively, targeting the elderly, children and women is going too far. Please release that person and direct all your anger towards this old man instead. Elder Biam spoke as humbly and pleadingly as possible. The situation was already close to the worst, so he was trying to appeal to their compassion. Of course, this plea for sympathy was not only aimed at those threatening them but also to garner public sympathy from the bystanders. Murmur, murmur. With Elder Biam's intentions, the people in the inn started whispering and causing a commotion. From their perspective, it appeared as if Seop Chun and Mong Muyak had suddenly barged in and attacked the veiled woman and her bodyguards. No way. Who are those guys? Why are they doing this? They were murmuring, but naturally it could be heard. This isn't good. Seop Chun, the third captain commander of the Heaven and Earth Society's headquarters, found the gazes of the bystanders burdensome. He had followed Mok Jiongun's sudden order, but there were too many onlookers in this situation. In such circumstances, regardless of one's identity, pressing a blade against a woman's neck and threatening her wasn't a good look. My lord. Seop Chun called out to Mok Jiongun and signaled with his eyes. It meant that they had sufficiently warned these people, so wouldn't it be better to end it here? Reading this, Elder Biam spoke again in an imploring voice. I beg you. Please at least release that person. Even if they were from evil sects, they were still human, so he believed they couldn't simply ignore an appeal to their compassion. At that moment, Mok Jiongun opened his mouth. 2 out of the 3, the elderly, children and women, are included. You don't need to include this old man. Yes. Of course not. If a supreme master like you who has reached the peak stage of the transcendent realm, tries to be treated as a frail elderly, it would be shameless. I understand what you mean. So please, that sword currently pointing at the young lady. But you know what? Who was the one who ordered such a formidable master to forcefully bring us, even if it meant using force? Elder Biam's words were blocked by Mok Jiongun's remark. Didn't you mention outside that it was due to that veiled lady's insistence? At these words, Elder Biam spoke in a flustered tone. When did this old man say that? Speaking like this would make it seem like he was using the young lady as an excuse. Conscious of the veiled woman's mood, Elder Biam hurriedly made an excuse. The young lady didn't give such an order. This is purely because this old man. Don't bother trying to smooth things over. I'm not trying to. Grasp. At that moment, Mok Jiongun grabbed Elder Biam's shoulder. And as he pressed down forcefully, ugh. Thud. Elder Biam's knees were forcibly made to kneel. Although he had profound true energy cultivated over many years, he couldn't possibly compare to a master who had reached the transformation realm. Nash. Elder Biam gritted his teeth. Unlike before, being humiliated like this in front of so many people and that person was extremely shameful. However, Elder Biam had endured even greater humiliations for a long time in that place. Therefore he could bear something like this to escape the situation. Elder Biam calmly opened his mouth again. Look, isn't this enough? Please stop here. Judging whether it's enough or not isn't up to the one who started this. Crunch. Arg. Elder Biam's face contorted in pain as the hand gripping his shoulder tightened as if it would crush it. The veiled woman then shouted, Sir. Seeing that, Elder Biam shook his head with all his might despite the agony. It meant to absolutely not intervene. However, stop. Stop it. The veiled woman, unable to bear it any longer, shouted at Mok Jiongun. At this, Mok Jiongun smiled and said, You finally open your mouth. Impudent fellow. Remove your hand from Sir immediately. Removing my hand or not is up to me. Ha! The veiled woman found it absurd. No one had ever insulted her in this manner. Yet a mere ruffian with a barely handsome face dared to ignore her order? The veiled woman trembled and spoke. You are truly the epitome of impudence. The impudent one is you. The culprit who summoned a busy person and caused this mess shouldn't be saying such things. How dare you? Words won't work after all. Crunch. Arg. At that moment an even louder scream escaped Elder Biam's mouth. He had been enduring it by gritting his teeth, but judging from his reddened face with bulging veins, one could imagine how painful it was. Moreover, the shoulder being gripped was turning red with blood. Stop. Stop it. Is that what you want? Yes. I want it. So now stop. If you want me to let go, there's a simple method. A simple method? Yes. What is it? Kneel and apologize. Then perhaps the strength in my hand will loosen. Those words made her entire body tremble with anger. When leaving that place, Elder Beam had earnestly advised her to avoid revealing her identity unless absolutely necessary, but now she couldn't bear it anymore. She immediately removed her veil. Beneath it, a beautiful face was revealed. Oh my! Wow! Gasps of admiration flowed from here and there. Not only was her face beautiful, but she also possessed a truly noble appearance. Even Mong Muyak, who had his blade against her neck, was inwardly astonished upon seeing her face. Who the hell is this woman? Beyond her appearance, the air of elegance she exuded was extraordinary. It wasn't something ordinary people could possess. Then the woman who had revealed her face glared fiercely at Mok Jun and spoke. Rude fellow. Do you know who I am to do such a thing? What's with this woman? Mong Muyak frowned at her words. He had already guessed that she wasn't an ordinary person, considering she had a formidable master like Elder Beam as a mere bodyguard and was wearing luxurious clothing. However, even if she was such a woman in a situation like this, she should normally be frightened, trembling, or submitting, yet she still maintained her composure. Moreover, judging from her tone, she seemed to have considerable pride in her identity. In that case, could this woman be related to the government or the imperial palace? Mong Muyak swallowed dryly with a stiff face. If this woman was indeed connected to the government or the imperial palace, it would become quite troublesome. Although the relationship between the government and the martial arts world had improved significantly recently, they still maintained inviolable territories. If his guess was correct, it could lead to a truly bothersome situation. Moreover, their secret mission this time was in the imperial capital Kaifeng, making it even more so. It might be better to end it here. However, am I obligated to know who you are? Instead, Mok Jiongun went a step further. Naturally, Mok Jiongun's provocation could only infuriate her further. Ha! So that's how you're going to be. You're escalating a matter that could be resolved with a single kneel. The one escalating things is you, bastard. Once you know who I am, let's see if you can still behave so rudely. Further words would be an unwise choice. Mok Jiongun interrupted her. At this, she scoffed and spoke in an arrogant voice. Humph. It's too late to regret now. I will definitely. Crunch. Arg. Before she could finish her sentence, with a terrible scream, Elder Beam's shoulder was twisted, and the bone pierced through the flesh, protruding out. Witnessing that horrific sight, the woman who was about to reveal her identity turned pale and lost her words. Mok Jiongun then smiled and said to her, Shall I tell you in advance what will happen next? How dare you? I don't know who you are. Nor do I care. But if a bothersome situation arises because you reveal your precious identity out of pointless pride, I will have no choice but to make an inevitable decision. An inevitable decision? Yes. I'll make it as if nothing ever happened. What? You don't seem to understand. Have you heard of the phrase, kill to silence? Kill to silence. It meant killing people to prevent information from leaking out. At those words, her expression, which had been arrogant and confident, completely stiffened. However, Mok Jiongun didn't stop there. Sweeping his indifferent gaze over the surrounding people in the inn, he spoke nonchalantly. How unfortunate. If that young lady opens her mouth, you all won't be able to leave here alive either. Well, it's not my fault, so blame the young lady. The moment he finished speaking, the atmosphere inside the inn instantly turned deathly still. He spoke casually as if it were nothing, but the overwhelming pressure was enough to drive everyone into extreme tension. This bastard. How could he steer the situation in such a way? As she was about to open her mouth in disbelief, all the gazes in the inn simultaneously turned towards her. She was perplexed by the gazes filled with resentment and fear, so intense they were suffocating. Why? The real target of the threat was that man, so why were they looking at her with such eyes? Under their gazes, her lips wouldn't part. Amidst that, she saw Mok Jiongun's face shrouded in shadows through her eyes. He was grinning with a spine-chilling smile that reached his ears, his face filled with nothing but malice. Shiver. A chill ran down her spine and throughout her entire body. The moment fear gripped her entire being, her legs turned weak and gave out. Thud. Chapter 203, Water Demon 5. 3 years ago one day. Hi and ah. Yes, when it's just the two of us, you can call me Dad. Yes, Dad. Our little Spitfire has turned 17 this year, becoming a grown lady. Heh. A lady as in a graceful and beautiful lady? The one called Hyena bragged about her elated mood, twirling her colorful skirt. The middle-aged man with a refined and elegant appearance smiled and said, "You've been studying the Book of Songs." Yes. The Book of Songs says, "A graceful and beautiful lady is a good match for a gentleman." The Book of Songs states that a graceful and beautiful lady is a good match for a gentleman. It means that a gentle and chaste woman is a fitting partner for a virtuous man. But I don't want to become a graceful and beautiful lady. Why is that? Half the world is women and they're told to be graceful and beautiful ladies. I don't want to become so old-fashioned. Then what do you want to be? Men can have 3 wives and 4 concubines, so is there a law saying I can't do the same? At her words, the middle-aged man shook his head. Since she was his only daughter, he had spoiled her, so it worried him sometimes. This child was still under his protection, so she had nothing to fear, but both this place, full of conspiracies and power struggles, and the world were exceedingly treacherous. Hi and ah. Yes. You don't need to concern yourself with being a lady or chaste. However, now that you've grown up, your father has one piece of advice. What is it? Everything you enjoy now stems solely from your surname and that blood. You have a nobler bloodline than anyone else and deserve to enjoy it. But, the world isn't so easy. What do you mean? Don't be overly confident in the power of your surname and bloodline. Why are you saying this? Right now, your bloodline and this father serve as a sturdy fence for you, but there will come a time when that fence will be of no use. When that fearful and confusing moment arrives, in the end, the only thing that can protect you will not be this father or this surname, but your own judgment. Thud. Her legs weakened and she unintentionally knelt down. She had lived her entire life without fear or worry. However, the unprecedented terror stemming from another's malice shredded her heart and made her tremble incessantly. Tremble, tremble. Seeing her uncontrollably shaking hands and feet, she suddenly recalled her father's words. Her father, who had always been lenient, had advised her with a stern face for the first time. When that fearful and confusing moment arrives, in the end, the only thing that can protect you will not be this father or this surname, but your own judgment. At the time, she thought her father was in a bad mood. So she didn't take it seriously. Would such a moment as her father mentioned ever come? She firmly believed that she had an absolute bloodline and surname, so no one could touch her unless they shared the same blood. However, upon venturing outside and facing a dangerous moment where all of that was useless, she inevitably collided with the wall of reality. The bastard's voice reached her ears. "You've knelt, so all that's left is to apologize." These words caused her eyes to tremble violently. I have to kneel and apologize to such a lowly thug. She had the noblest bloodline in the Central Plains. For someone like her to suffer such humiliation was unthinkable. Even if it meant death, it might be right to maintain face for the sake of this noble bloodline. However, reality wasn't so simple. It seems difficult for you to say those words. It would inconvenience everyone here. As soon as Mok Jong-un finished speaking, the people inside the inn glared at her with resentful eyes and whispered, "Damn it. Is it that hard? Just apologize and be done with it. Why do we, who have nothing to do with this, have to suffer like this? Who does she think she is?" They were murmuring quietly, but all those voices strangely rang in her ears as if they were pounding. This drove her into a corner, making it impossible for her to maintain her pride. She lifted her head with difficulty and looked at someone. That someone was Elder Beam. Arg. Elder Beam, who had suffered an injury where his shoulder bone was broken and pierced through the flesh. Suffering in agony, Elder Beam desperately tried to say something to her. "Must endure." Clench. At Elder Beam's words, she bit her lower lip hard. Enduring humiliation at every moment was painful and infuriating, but if she let it all out here, she and everyone else would die. The lowly ones in the inn could all die for all she cared. However, not only her own life belonging to a noble bloodline, but she couldn't let Sir Beam, whom her father had assigned to her, die in a place like this. As a result, she opened her mouth with the determination to endure humiliation. Nash. I hate you, sir. You have committed a great thing. Drip, drip. Her pride was so wounded that tears wouldn't stop flowing as she spoke. In the end, the only thing that can protect you will not be this father or this surname, but your own judgment. However, pondering her father's words, she finally finished speaking. Please, forgive me. Finally, after submitting and completing her apology, all eyes in the inn turned to Mok Jae-young. Everyone had tense looks on their faces. They feared, what if that fellow broke his promise and killed them all? At that moment, Mok Jae-young licked his lips and said, "Unfortunately, I'll have to end it here." Unfortunately. At Mok Jae-young's words, Elder Beam sincerely clicked his tongue. It was no different than saying he really intended to slaughter everyone in the inn if the young lady had held out until the end. He hadn't expected it, but this fellow had a truly vicious nature. Young lady. Elder Beam was truly proud of her. If she hadn't endured and had let out her anger and maintained her pride, everything would have been over. In that sense, this incident might have been medicine rather than poison for her. At the very least, she had realized the reality that her noble status and bloodline didn't protect her from everything. Swish. Elder Beam carefully looked at Mok Jae-young. Mok Jae-young then grinned and signaled to Mong Muyak, saying, "Sheath your sword." Yes. As the order was given, Mong Muyak removed the sword from her neck. With the sword removed from her neck, the woman who had endured humiliation and apologized inwardly vowed she would take this incident as a stepping stone and never again allow herself to be in a situation where she had to kneel or suffer humiliation. And, "I won't forgive you." That man who had subjected her to such humiliation. He would never forget him. Since he had inflicted such humiliation and disgrace upon her, the one who inherited the noblest bloodline in this country, he would definitely pay the price. Enjoy it while you can. But before long, you will beg me in the most miserable way. She raised her head and looked at the people in the inn. Everyone was relieved and happy that the situation had ended peacefully because she had knelt and apologized. Seeing them like that made her feel disgusted. Those bastards were all the same. They only cared about their own safety and couldn't say a word to the one threatening them, instead cornering her. How dare these lowly ones? She couldn't forgive these bastards either. They had contributed to her humiliation and witnessed it without missing a single detail. She glared at them. As if sensing her gaze, they all avoided meeting her eyes. Just wait a little. Once those fellows left this place, she would have to tell the guards to kill them all without leaving a single one. Although she hadn't revealed her identity, she didn't want this shameful incident to reach anyone's ears. Seeing her murderous expression, Mok Jae-young raised the corners of his lips. Then he lightly tapped Elder Beam's uninjured shoulder and headed towards the inn's entrance. Whoosh. As they distanced themselves from the inn, Mong Muyak glanced back with somewhat worried eyes. Seop Chun asked him, puzzled, "What's wrong?" At his question, Mong Muyak looked at Mok Jae-young, not Seop Chun, and said, "My lord. What is it? Is it all right to just leave like this?" At this question, Seop Chun was about to ask why, but then nodded his head in agreement and said, "Actually, I have the same thought as Muyak." About what? Although she submitted under the pressure of power, she seemed to have considerable pride. And the way she kept mentioning her identity. She seemed to be the child of a high-ranking government official or someone from the imperial palace. At Mong Muyak's speculation, Seop Chun tilted his head and said, "The imperial palace? But isn't that going too far? If she were a member of the imperial family, wouldn't she have had more guards than that? She had an old master who had reached the peak stage of the transcendent realm and 8 first-rate warriors as guards. Isn't that quite a lot? Still, if she were a member of the imperial family, I think she would have brought soldiers as well. Well, who knows? She might have come out quietly for a secret mission." At Mong Muyak's words, Seop Chun frowned. If what he said was true, there could be repercussions from ending it like this. Therefore, Seop Chun said to Mok Jae-young, "My lord, since things have already happened, it might be better for us to." "There's no need for that." "What? Why? Have you heard of the phrase, killing with a borrowed knife?" "Killing with a borrowed knife?" "Killing with a borrowed knife. It means harming others by using someone else, like borrowing a knife to kill." He didn't understand why Mok Jae-young was saying this. As he was puzzled. Aarg. A scream came from the direction of the inn. Seop Chun and Mong Muyak turned their heads with confused expressions to look in that direction. As Mok Jae-eun and his group left, she hurriedly rushed to the injured elder Beam. She asked worriedly, "Sir Beam, are you all right?" "Haha. I'm fine. I can endure this much." Still, seeing the bone broken and piercing through the flesh, she wasn't sure if she could call this fine. However, Elder Beam was a formidable master of martial arts recognized even by her father. As he said himself, he could overcome this much without difficulty. "Are you sure you're all right? Please don't worry too much." At Elder Beam's answer, she whispered in his ear, "All right. Can I ask you a favor?" "What is it?" "After you recover, can you take care of all the people in this inn with the help of the guard warriors?" At her words, Elder Beam's pupils trembled. He had sensed that she was in a bad mood to some extent, but he never thought the repercussions would extend to the people in the inn. Of course, it wasn't incomprehensible. She, with a great bloodline, had shown everyone the sight of her suffering humiliation. There's no other choice. He couldn't blame her for this cruel decision. Therefore, Elder Beam was about to nod and agree. Right at that moment, swish swish. At the sound ringing in his ears, Elder Beam hurriedly tried to move his body. However, perhaps due to the injury in his shoulder, his body wouldn't listen to him as he wished. Thus, thud thud. Ugh. Elder Beam used his body as a shield to block the incoming objects with his back. Judging from the burning sensation on his back, they were definitely hidden weapons. However, what's wrong with my body? Although his right shoulder injury was severe, it shouldn't have made his body this heavy and uncontrollable. Come to think of it, the sensation in the shoulder that vicious fellow had lightly tapped was strange. As if he had been poisoned by something. Right at that moment. The startled Elder Beam twisted his body with all his might. However, a sharp sword pierced through his abdomen and protruded out. Stab. Seeing this right in front of her, she was so shocked that she screamed. Arg. Swish. Ah. Elder Beam urgently pushed her forward and turned his body to execute a claw technique. Bam bam. Ugh. Whoosh. Someone who was struck in the chest by Elder Beam's claw technique was pushed back. That someone was none other than one of the wanderers who had been watching the situation inside the inn. But it wasn't just one person. The wanderers had already drawn their swords and surrounded Elder Beam. These people how? Elder Beam's complexion rapidly darkened. Whoosh. At the same time outside the inn, Mok Jae-eun smiled and said, "I casually mentioned to one of the wanderers there. I asked if that esteemed young lady would leave them alone after suffering such humiliation." At these words, Sib Chun and Mong Muyak immediately clicked their tongues. They understood the meaning of killing with a borrowed knife that Mok Jae-eun had mentioned. The inside of that inn would now become a bloody battlefield with their own fight. "Shall we go now?" Mok Jae-eun turned his body as if he was no longer interested in this matter. Seeing his back, Sib Chun and Mong Muyak genuinely felt fear towards Mok Jae-eun. He was completely manipulating the situation as he wished, like flipping the palm of his hand. Such a person became an enemy, it would be truly terrifying. Chapter 204, Karma, 1. Whoosh. Sib Chun, the third captain commander of the Heaven and Earth Society's headquarters, clicked his tongue at the fierce downpour. The rain seems to be getting heavier as we approach the riverside. He wasn't sure if crossing the river would be possible even with a large boat. Upon climbing a high hill, he saw the river current that was practically a raging torrent, which was deeply worrying. Just then, the only estate in the village came into view. Compared to the magnificent estates in the inner city of the Heaven and Earth Society, it was utterly shabby, but it was evident that it was quite wealthy for a small riverside village. Mong Muyak looked at the estate and said, "There seem to be quite a few people inside." At his words, Mok Jae-eun nodded. That was because he could sense the presence of people inside the closed estate, and smoke was even rising from the tiled roofs. They must be employees. Let's go inside for now. Sib Chun took the lead and walked towards the main gate. As he grabbed the door handle to knock, he noticed a plaque-like object attached next to the gate and spoke with a glint in his eyes. "My lord. What is it?" "It seems the boat owner is not an ordinary village tycoon. If not ordinary, then extraordinary? Look at this." The plaque that Sib Chun pointed to read, "Meritorious Retainer of Quelling Turmoil, 4th rank." Meritorious Retainer of Quelling Turmoil? As Mok Jung-un read it, Mong Muyak, who had approached closely, frowned and said, "It seems the owner of this estate was a government official who had rendered meritorious service." A government official? Yes. Judging from the plaque being hung right next to the main gate, he might be a government official who retired to his hometown after rendering meritorious service. Oh my, what a day it is. Sep Chun clicked his tongue. At the inn, they had already encountered individuals who might be related to the government or the imperial palace. If the owner of this estate was also a former government official, it would be truly ironic. Of course, unlike the reactions of these two, Mok Jung-un seemed utterly unconcerned as he said, "Does it matter whether he was a government official or not? We just need to borrow a boat and cross the river." Well, that's true. He was right about that. It was just an ironic situation. Sip Chun then grabbed the door handle and knocked on the gate. Knock, knock. Perhaps due to the heavy rain, there was no response from inside. So Sip Chun shouted and knocked on the door. "Is anyone inside?" Knock, knock. After knocking a few times like that, the gate opened soon after. Creak. As the gate opened, a woman in her mid-20s wearing a paper umbrella appeared, accompanied by two sturdy-looking men. Seeing them, Mok Jung-un's eyes flashed with interest. She didn't seem to be the boat owner he had heard about from the innkeeper. But she appeared to be related. Both the innkeeper and the old man named Elderbeam had mentioned that the boat owner was on the verge of death. Judging from the woman's haggard face, dark complexion and lack of energy, she might be the boat owner's daughter. "What brings you gentlemen here at this late hour? Pardon us, but may we meet the owner of the estate?" The haggard-looking woman didn't answer Sip Chun's question. Instead, she glanced at the military sabers hanging from Sip Chun's waist and asked, "Forgive my presumption, but are you simply travelers seeking to cross the river? Or are you the ones who came after seeing the notice in front of the government office in the nearby county?" At the woman's words, Sip Chun furrowed his brows. They had said they came to see the owner of the estate, but the question she asked in return was strange. He understood her asking if they were travelers trying to cross the river, but he couldn't comprehend what she meant by the notice in front of the government office. A notice literally means a written request for help. Puzzled by this, Sip Chun thought it had nothing to do with them and was about to answer that it was the former. We came after seeing the notice." At that moment, Mok Jung-un abruptly interrupted Sip Chun. "My lord." Sip Chun looked at Mok Jung-un startled. Their purpose was simply to borrow a boat to cross the river. But if they unnecessarily said they came after seeing a notice they didn't even know about and were asked about its content. Ah. Just then the haggard-looking woman let out a gasp and her eyes reddened. Huh. Sip Chun couldn't understand the woman's reaction. Wasn't she suspicious? Then the woman clasped her hands together, bowed her head and spoke in a choked voice. "Thank you. I sincerely thank you for coming even in this manner." Her reaction was as if she was desperately clinging to a straw, willing to grasp at anything. What on earth had happened for her to react like this? As he was puzzled, Mok Jung-un casually asked her, "We came because of the notice, but we would like to meet the master first. Is that possible?" Ah. At these words, Sip Chun finally nodded in understanding. The woman had a sharp edge to her when asked if they were simply travelers trying to cross the river. So rather than directly stating their purpose, it was a way to indirectly approach and confirm whether the boat owner's condition was truly suitable for sailing or not. At Mok Jung-un's question, the woman raised her head, let out a deep sigh and said, "I can show you my father's condition, but he hasn't been in his right mind since a while ago. It seems to be the result of his past karma." Ah, so it was true? At her words, Sip Chun looked at Mong Muyak with troubled eyes. Mong Muyak also couldn't hide his difficulty. If they couldn't cross the river quickly, they might not be able to make it to the gathering point on time. While they were worrying about this, Mok Jung-un showed interest in something else. Mok Jung-un's gaze was not on the woman but behind her, or more precisely beyond the main gate. It's trembling. The energy of a vengeful spirit could be felt from inside the estate. It was exceedingly chilling and ominous. Moreover, it seemed to have been going on for quite some time, as the entire interior of the estate was heavily stagnant, as if sinking like a boat, being engulfed by this ominous energy. That master is possessed by a water demon. So this is what it meant. It seemed the words of the old woman, the innkeeper, were not mere rumors after all. However, what was peculiar was that such ominous energy was only felt when the gate was opened. As if someone had artificially blocked it, like at the Corpse Blood Valley cliff. Oh. Is it this? Mok Jaeongun's gaze turned to the 6 talismans meticulously attached between the cracks of the gate. Upon seeing this, Mok Jaeongun immediately recognized what it was. 6 talismans 4 directions technique. Whoever did it seemed to be a fairly skilled exorcist. Considerable spell power could be felt from the talismans. They were attached not long ago. After absorbing the power of the beast inside the scroll and third-eyed, Mok Jaeongun's spell power had also reached a level nearly on par with Sun-level diviner. He could vaguely estimate when this talisman technique was formed just by sensing the energy flowing from the talismans. Thus, it seems a skilled exorcist recently visited? At Mok Jaeongun's words, the woman replied with wide eyes. How did you know that? The person seems to be proficient in talisman techniques. In addition to the cracks of the main gate, they must have attached them to the back gate and the walls on the east and west sides, right? Yes. I didn't know because it was hidden by the bamboo fence, but are you perhaps an exorcist? The reason she asked this was that Mok Jaeongun wasn't wearing the Taoist robe that exorcists usually wore. At her question, Mok Jaeongun smiled and replied, My skills are insignificant, but I learned techniques from a renowned exorcist. Insignificant. At Mok Jaeongun's words, Sip Chun and Mong Muyak inwardly clicked their tongues. He possessed such miraculous exorcism skills that he could even reattach a severed arm, so how could he describe it as insignificant? It was unnecessary modesty. Of course, the woman, unaware of this, shook her head and said gratefully, It's no small feat to come here through the heavy rain on this dark night. I sincerely thank you. Not at all. But do we have to stay here? Oh my, what am I thinking? I left the guest standing in the rain. Please come inside. The woman led Mok Jaeongun's group into the estate. As they entered, she introduced herself. Her name was Wu Hyang and she was the eldest daughter of the estate owner. Perhaps because Mok Jaeongun and his group had said they came after seeing the notice, her attitude remained friendly throughout. However, the 2 men guarding her were different. They kept glancing at them with dissatisfied eyes as they guided them. So, Chong Ryong said. The 2 men were walking side by side and their steps were in unison as they moved forward. It couldn't be considered a mere coincidence as their walking postures were also quite similar. Mok Jaeongun also nodded in agreement. Come to think of it, the meritorious retainer of quelling turmoil, on the plaque next to the main gate could also mean a meritorious retainer who suppressed a rebellion. Considering this and the fact that he had individuals presumed to be government soldiers as guards, as Chong Ryong said, there was a high probability that the estate owner was a retired military official. Then Siep Chun approached Mok Jaeongun and whispered, My lord, I apologize, but do you intend to help the estate owner? We need to take the boat. If he were in a normal state they could threaten him to sail the boat, but it was the opposite situation. I understand that, but let's see first whether something ominous is attached to him or not. What? At Mok Jaeongun's words, Siep Chun was puzzled. He thought Mok Jaeongun might be trying to help the estate owner who was said to be on the verge of death, with miraculous exorcism techniques like when he reattached Mong Muyak's severed arm. But he suddenly mentioned checking if something ominous was attached, so he couldn't understand what he meant. So he cautiously asked, What do you mean by that ominous thing? Something like a vengeful spirit or a malevolent ghost? He became even more confused. Weren't vengeful spirits and malevolent ghosts closer to superstition and strangeness? He couldn't understand why his master was saying such things, but Wu Hyang, the estate owner's daughter who was leading the way, said, The benefactors who arrived earlier after seeing the notice are guarding the main hall where my father is. The main hall. Yes, the exorcist named Yi Mun-hye said tonight would be the critical moment. At her words, Mok Jaeongun nodded. That was because as they approached the main hall, the ominous energy became more turbulent and stronger. With this level of energy it was definitely not low-grade. There's someone over there. Wu Hyang pointed to the front of the main hall building visible beyond the pavilion. Mok Jaeongun's eyes flashed with interest upon seeing this. Under the eaves of the main hall's roof, a man was leaning against the wall, drinking from a gourd. This man was not very tall, but his muscles were so brawny and developed that he was twice the size of an ordinary person. But what was more noticeable than this was his nearly bald head with short hair and the prayer beads filled with broken eggs hanging around his neck. A monk. His attire and appearance certainly seemed like that of a monk. In a way, he even gave off a similar feeling to horse monk. Then Seop Chun spoke. "Oh my. What is he doing here? Do you know him?" Instead of Seop Chun, Mong Muyak intervened and replied. Demon-subduing fist warrior, Jajiam Jong. Demon-subduing fist warrior? It was a unique title. Demon-subduing literally meant subjugating demons. There was actually an organization that used this title, and it was none other than Shaolin Temple, known as the birthplace and center of the righteous martial arts world. Shaolin Temple had monks with various precepts and titles, and the title demon-subduing was usually given to martial monks who cultivated both Buddhism and martial arts. Unlike the title demon-subduing, that would be fitting for martial monks who practice Buddhism, the aura emanating from that man was rather crude and exuded a rough scent of blood. Mok Jayongun's question was quickly resolved. That man is an expelled monk from Shaolin. An expelled monk? Yes. An expelled monk. Literally, a monk who was excommunicated for violating the precepts. At these words, Mok Jayongun nodded as if he understood. It must be because of the precept against killing. The precept against killing. A monk who practices Buddhism must not kill any living being. That was no different even for a monk from Shaolin Temple, known as the center of martial arts. At Mok Jayongun's words, Mong Muyak shook his head and replied. No. He was expelled for indulging too much in alcohol. Chapter 205, Karma 2. He was expelled for indulging too much in alcohol? Mok Jayongun asked in response. The reason was that it deviated from his expectations. It may be hard to believe, but that's the official reason Shaolin Temple used to expel him. At Mong Muyak's words, Mok Jayongun's eyes glimmered with interest. The expelled monk's name was Jajiam Jong, wasn't it? For a monk, he had a rough appearance that exuded a wild aura. But even if that wasn't the case, that man had stained his hands with a lot of blood. Mok Jayongun, sensitive to blood, could instinctively sense this. There seems to be more to it than that. At Mok Jayongun's words, this time Seop Chun clicked his tongue and said, We're in trouble, my lord. That bald monk is one of the 3 madmen of the Central Plains. 3 madmen? He's one of the 3 people currently known as the most insane in the martial arts world. Insane, you say? At Mok Jayongun's question, Mong Muyak, the deputy chief of the sect leader's direct information department, said, Although he's been quiet recently, there was a time when Shaolin was in an uproar because they released a madman due to his incomprehensible eccentric behavior. A madman? Shaolin, like other sects, severs the meridians or destroys the danjian of martial monks they expel, reclaiming their sect's martial arts. But that man still possesses the martial arts he learned from Shaolin. That's why many people in the martial arts world protested to Shaolin. Telling them to solve the problem they created? Solve the problem you created. It means the one who caused the problem should solve it. Mong Muyak nodded and said, Yes. For someone like that, he seems unscathed. Indeed. I don't know why, but as the leader of the 9 great sects and the center of righteous martial arts, Shaolin should be able to subdue him, but they're simply turning a blind eye. Interesting. To the smiling Mok Jayongun, Seop Chun said with a worried tone, My lord, I don't know why that man is here, but getting involved with him could be troublesome. Is he that unruly? He's someone who has committed eccentric acts regardless of whether they're righteous or evil sects, earning him the nickname of a madman. Moreover, I heard his martial arts are in a league of their own. In a league of their own? Yes. Although it seems like he only cultivated external energy, there are rumors that he's the only one who mastered the supreme power, which is said to have been lost hundreds of years ago even in Shaolin. Shaolin has numerous supreme cultivation methods. Most of the mind methods they possess are called top-grade methods in the martial arts world. However, when the worst catastrophe that divided the old and current martial arts world occurred, half of them were lost. Fortunately, the genuine versions of methods like the Great Vehicle Prajna Zen, Muscle Change Classic and Marrow Washing Classic were hidden in Buddhist scriptures, allowing their lineage to be fully preserved, and other mind methods could be restored to some extent over time. However, the only thing that Shaolin couldn't restore was the supreme power and the great Zen of Bodhidharma. There was a lack of remaining materials, and it was said to be extremely difficult to learn. If he had restored it at a young age to that extent, it was no different from possessing the talent of a grandmaster-level genius. My lord, there's nothing good that can come from getting involved with that man. Why are you all like this? At that moment, Wu Xiang, the estate owner's daughter who was guiding the way, stopped and looked at them puzzled. Mok Jiangun smiled and said, "It's nothing." Then he spoke softly to Siep Chun and Mong Muyak. "Just ignore it." "What? Didn't you say we need to cross the river quickly whether he mastered the supreme power or not, or whether he's a madman or not?" "That's true, but then does it matter who he is?" With those words, Mok Jiangun walked past the pavilion as if he didn't care at all. Siep Chun and Mong Muyak looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders with a resigned expression, and followed behind Mok Jiangun. As they passed the pavilion, the demon-subduing fist warrior Jiajiam Zhang, who was drinking from a gourd under the eaves of the roof, frantically waved his hand at the empty air. Seeing this, Siep Chun and Mong Muyak frowned and clicked their tongues inwardly. He's indeed a madman. That's all it seemed to them. However, Wu Xiang, the estate owner's daughter, seemed accustomed to it and called out without paying any attention. "Sir. Sir, these gentlemen are." Swish swish. At her call, the demon-subduing fist warrior Jiajiam Zhang waved his hand holding the gourd as if telling her not to disturb him. Then he continued his incomprehensible actions. He wildly swung his other hand in the air, which looked bizarre to anyone. However, Mok Jiangun nodded slightly as if agreeing with Chong Ryong's words. As they entered the pavilion, the ominous energy was surging even more, and perhaps due to this influence, low-grade miscellaneous spirits that couldn't even take form were gathering from all directions. They seemed to be gathering through the earth veins and the falling rain, and although the exorcist had blocked the energy with talismans, it didn't seem to completely stop it. Woo-woo. Hew hew hew. Whimpering sounds could be heard from here and there. This would only get worse. Damn it. Bam bam. The demon-subduing fist warrior Jiajiam Zhang drove away the miscellaneous spirits trying to enter the building with an annoyed expression. Mok Jiangun's eyes flashed with interest upon seeing this. This was the reason why both Mok Jiangun and Chong Ryong were surprised. In the case of exorcists, they could make contact with strange beings like vengeful spirits and malevolent ghosts through spell power or mediums imbued with it. However, among ordinary people, although there were occasionally those whose spiritual power awakened and opened their eyes after death, there were hardly any who could make contact with them. Mok Jiangun's ability to directly make contact with the dead or strange beings was closer to something innate. It could be considered an extremely exceptional case, but that expelled monk Jiajiam Zhang was making contact in a slightly different manner. The wooden puppet that Chong Ryong resided in had difficulty sensing the energy itself. That's why she was asking Mok Jiangun, who could directly discern the energy with his eyes. It was clearly visible to Mok Jiangun's eyes, which had already opened the energy of the three eyes in his right eye. Although temporary, whenever the expelled monk Jiajiam Zhang swung his hand at the miscellaneous spirits, the surrounding energy gathered in his hand. That energy was completely different from what was refined through methods. It was closer to a natural form. Now Mok Jiangun could understand what she meant. The natural principles seemed to mean harmonizing with the energy of all things. However, this was very abstract, so it didn't seem to be a realm that could be achieved simply by recognizing and desiring it. In any case, if the supreme power had such a remarkable utility as Chong Ryong said, he couldn't help but be interested. Just then Siep Chun quietly spoke. "My lord, doesn't something seem strange?" "What is it?" "That expelled monk may be a madman, but something feels eerily ominous as if unknown individuals are lying in ambush around us." "You feel it too?" Mong Muyak also frowned and agreed with this. In fact, ever since entering the estate, they had been feeling a strange energy that they couldn't quite put their finger on, but as they stood in front of the main hall building, it had become overwhelmingly strong. At their reactions, Mok Jiangun chuckled and said, "You both certainly have good perception." "Perception? What do you mean?" "Considering you can sense the miscellaneous spirits around without spell power." At Mok Jiangun's words, Siep Chun and Mong Muyak's expressions stiffened. Was his lord saying this to tease them? But this ominous energy they kept feeling was extremely unpleasant. They wanted to flee from this place right away. Right at that moment. Ugh. Wu Xiang, the estate owner's daughter, clutched her chest and staggered. One of the men guarding her grabbed her as she was about to fall. Young lady. Ah. Her face, which was already haggard, turned even paler and her body trembled. Then, damn it! The expelled monk Jiajiamzhong, who had been driving away the miscellaneous spirits with a gourd in his hand, hurriedly approached her. There was a reason for Wu Xiang's condition. That was because 3 formless miscellaneous spirits were clinging to her. Her body and mind had already been weakened to the extreme from being enveloped in the ominous energy of the estate for a long time, and the miscellaneous spirits had targeted her. These damn things. Jiajiamzhong tried to remove one of the miscellaneous spirits attached to her chest. The guard holding her shouted, "What are you trying to do? Get away from her immediately. Get away. You bastard, are you looking down on someone trying to help? If you don't move your hand, I'll punch a hole in your face and send you to Buddha." His words were not only crude but also vicious. Angered by this, one of the men intervened and said, "If you lay a single finger on the young lady's body." Thud. Before he could finish his sentence, the man collapsed, unconscious from Jiajiamzhong's punch. "What will you do if I do?" The man supporting Wu Xiang couldn't hide his bewilderment. He had thought the monk's physique was good and muscular, but he didn't expect him to be this strong. "Hey, if you don't move right now, that young lady will become a corpse today. You don't come any closer. Don't move. Today this bald monk will open the precept against killing." Threatening like that will naturally lead to misunderstandings. At the mocking voice coming from behind, the expelled monk Jiajiamzhong turned his head with a fierce expression. "What? You bastard who looks like a long-lived courtesan. Do you think I'm desperate to touch this woman's chest right now?" Seeing him getting angry, Mok Jiangun raised the corners of his mouth. And he said, "Interesting. What? You're not a madman, just someone who doesn't care about others. You bastard, what nonsense are you spewing?" Swish. Mok Jiangun suddenly stretched out his hand. Thinking he was attacking, Jiajiamzhong turned his body and tried to assume a fighting stance. Right at that moment. Hoo. With a howling sound, something hazy brushed past and was caught in Mok Jiangun's hand. They were none other than the miscellaneous spirits clinging to Wu Xiang. Mok Jiangun, who had sucked in the miscellaneous spirits with a technique, chuckled and sizzle. He directly exterminated them with death energy. Seeing the miscellaneous spirits disappear in an instant, the expelled monk Jiajiamzhong opened his mouth with surprised eyes. What are you? What was this bastard's identity?" Based on his perception, he thought they were martial artists brought by Wu Xiang, the estate owner's daughter. In fact, he had sensed energy at the peak level. But what was that just now? Not only did he pull the miscellaneous spirits with some strange technique like a vacuum, but he also exterminated them. Of course, he had to be surprised. However, woo. Even more miscellaneous spirits began to swarm from all directions. Their number was countless. But as the number of miscellaneous spirits increased exponentially like this, even those who weren't exorcists or had their spiritual eyes opened could sense them. Startle. What is this? Everywhere is. Mong Muyak and Siep Chun looked around with puzzled expressions. Although they couldn't see anything, the surroundings were being engulfed by some ominous energy. Damn it. There are so many. They said the talismans would block the evil spirits from entering, but nonsense. The expelled monk Jiajiamzhong hurriedly assumed a fighting stance. The surrounding energy began to gather towards him. It seemed he was about to confront the miscellaneous spirits trying to enter the main hall in earnest. At that moment, it would be a waste of time. A waste of time? Yes. It doesn't seem like a problem that can be solved by catching them one by one. No. Then do you have some brilliant idea, you bastard who looks like a long-lived courtesan? Your way of speaking isn't very pleasant. What? Let's put out the urgent fire first and fix that later. As soon as he finished speaking, clasp. Mok Jiangun formed simplified hand seals with his left hand. Soldier. Fight. Tear. Pray. They were the hand seals of the 9-character vitality method. Then in an instant an immense spell power filled the surroundings. Rumble. And then, boom. For huge pillars shot up from the corners around the main hall. These were created by Mok Jiongun's spell power and technique. The only one who could see this with the naked eye was the expelled monk Jajiam Jong, who had opened his spiritual eyes. This is... Swish. Mok Jiongun placed a talisman on his lips and muttered softly. 4 peaks linking technique. Whoosh. At that moment the 4 pillars connected, creating a massive surface. And that surface instantly blocked the surroundings of the main hall building with spell power. In that state, Mok Jiongun raised his hand upward, then opened and closed his palm. Then, boom 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 boom. The numerous miscellaneous spirits that had swarmed around the main hall couldn't withstand the vast spell power and instantly exploded. Witnessing this scene, the expelled monk Jajiam Jong was momentarily at a loss for words.